Civil society groups have welcomed the passing of the climate change bill, saying it is a step in the right direction towards ending dependency on fossil fuels. The bill will now be sent to the National Council of Provinces review, after which it will go back to the National Assembly for approval to be signed into law. Let's get some reaction now. We're joined by Mametlwe, Sebei, President of General Industries Workers Union of South Africa. Mametlwe, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening to you.
Let's just on that, your first reaction or initial reaction to the bill being passed on Tuesday?
We are saying that, it is, a step forward, that there's an attempt at having a bill that will provide an overarching response and coordination of the response to an ever, increasing threat of a climate catastrophe. And I think this would also overcome, or rather is a victory against a decades-long denialism, climate change denialism on the part of government. And I think as well, it may provide conversations about a way in which corporations that particularly participate in climate polluting industries can be held accountable.
Now, when you look at, Mametlwe, at some of the key elements of the bill, is to introduce a national adaptation objectives and scenarios. Looking at that from how South Africa have been handling some of these issues, how will this assist in the long run?
Look, we are saying that we welcome the fact that there is going to be a conversation, but also the fact that there is a planned legislation. But I think so far, the overall response of government has not been encouraging, because when you look at what the bill suggests, that for instance there has to be a national adaptation, but adaptation in the context of climate change would entail overhaul of many public infrastructures, including poorly built housing, including the lack of housing for many working class people, as well as just roads that lack storm water drainage systems, and just our emergency services, right? Now, when you consider this is what is required, and I think the bill correctly points out that is necessary. On the other hand, you have a government that is pursuing a neoliberal and austerity cuts at the moment that include cuts on spending on the very public services and public sector projects that are going to be necessary. So the last directive from Treasury says that, for instance, there must be a freeze, right, in a public service, or rather appointment to the public service. On the other hand, all the public infrastructure projects are also being frozen, precisely at the time when we need more houses. We need properly built roads that can be able to manage storm water from floods and all of that. So this is a contradiction between what this bill suggests has to be done, but also overall macroeconomic framework, as well as fiscal spending priorities on the part of government.
One of the other key challenges, Mametlwe, has always been the issue of enforcement, especially when you look at issues like greenhouse gas emission reductions. How do you think government will handle that? Because the legislation currently, relies on things like carbon tax.
Yes, even this bill, doesn't seem to address that, because it does say that corporations are going to be expected to submit their carbon, targets, to ensure that they stay within an allocated budget of what amount of greenhouse emissions they are allowed, right? But it doesn't say if the cooperation exceed its budgeted, or rather allocation, its budgeted allocations of greenhouse emissions, what then happens to it? And we know we live in a country and generally in a system where there is a generalized corporate impunity. Crimes committed or likely to be committed by the working class, which are crimes of poverty, are criminalized, they are, penalized severely, even sometimes just for effect of being poor. But corporations are rarely ever held accountable, even for similar crimes. Workers are dying in the mines due to avoidable accident and neglect of health and safety measures by the mining corporations. Nobody ever criminalizes that. And we are afraid that lack of clear mechanism of accountability, including criminal liability for exceeding those carbon targets, is what this bill actually suggests that we don't need to have. And I think that is going to further encourage corporate impunity.
During that debate, Minister Barbara Creecy emphasized the significance, particularly of this bill, but also stating that the legal obligation of every organ of the state to coordinate and harmonize the climate crisis policies, plans, and programs. Do you believe that we have the right policies and programs that can drive this bill to success?
Well, I think there are two things here, right? The legislation and policy making on the part of government, it reflects the overwhelming public opinion of the working class on a number of issues. So, however, there is an issue of, or rather at the core of how the state acts, including all of its organs, is determined really by the class character of the state. The fact that this is a capitalist state, which is beholden to corporate interests, and we've seen in many instances where the plans, the policies, and even legislative frameworks of government in place do offer environmental protections. However, even when those are being violated, government does absolutely nothing, and often than not, it's in collusion with the same corporations. I'll give an example, right? In the mining sector, just here, south of Johannesburg, you have had a situation where in the Gauteng special development plans or special development frameworks did indicate that there should not be any further mining projects approved for the area that has been allocated for housing development. Despite all of that, governments at all levels, from City of Johannesburg, Gauteng, and even National Department of Mineral Resources, have approved mining projects in contravention of those special planning frameworks. So I'm just saying that government saying this is what it intends to do, that this is what government stakeholders or rather state organs are obliged to do is one thing, and them implementing is another. And it's not just issue of subjective lack of will. It is a fact that this is a capitalist state organized around the big corporate and monopoly capitalist interests in the economy.
All right, Mametlwe, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. Mametlwe Sebei, talking to us there about the climate change bill, president of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa.